Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. The following content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute legal, psychological, or professional advice. The themes discussed involve complex historical and social issues regarding matrimonial law and interpersonal relationships, as depicted in fiction. Viewers are strongly encouraged to conduct their own due diligence and consult with qualified legal or mental health professionals regarding any personal circumstances. This analysis is based on historical trends and case studies within American literature and does not reflect universal certainties or outcomes in modern legal proceedings. The American dream is often sold as a package deal: the career, the home, and the lifelong partner. But if you look at the canon of American literature, the story truly begins only when that package is torn apart. We are conditioned to view divorce as a modern failure, a byproduct of the 20th century's shifting morals. However, the greatest writers in our history have used the dissolution of marriage as the ultimate litmus test for masculinity. In the world of the great American novel, the divorced man is not just a statistic. He is a revolutionary, a pariah, or a ghost. Statistics from historical social studies suggest that the portrayal of marital breakdown in literature often anticipated major shifts in national divorce rates by nearly 2 decades. We see the literary male protagonist struggling with the concept of the exit long before the legal system made it a viable reality. The shocking truth is that for over a century, American literature has been preparing men for the reality that the hardest part of building a life isn't starting it, but surviving the moment it ends. If you have ever felt that the expectations of modern manliness are at odds with your personal freedom, you are participating in a narrative arc that has been written and rewritten by the masters for over 150 years. This video series is a deep dive masterclass designed to provide you with a comprehensive understanding of the historical and psychological architecture of divorce for men in American literature. We are moving beyond simple plot summaries to analyze why these stories matter to the modern American man today. By examining the evolution of the male experience in these texts, we are uncovering the potential outcomes of the masculine crisis that occurs when the domestic contract is voided. You will learn how the shift from fault-based divorce to no-fault legislation transformed the American hero from a man who fights for his honor into a man who fights for his identity. We are going to look at how authors like Edith Wharton, John Updike, and Richard Yates use their protagonists to explore the heavy toll of social stigma, the complexities of fatherhood in a broken home, and the search for meaning in the aftermath of a collapsed union. This isn't just about books. It is about understanding the blueprint of the American male psyche and how our cultural history influences the way we perceive success, failure, and the pursuit of happiness in our own lives. To understand where we are going, we must first look at the historical trends that shaped the early American literary landscape. In the late 19th century, divorce was not a common plot point. It was a cataclysm. During this era, the legal barriers were so high that divorce was effectively a luxury for the wealthy or a death sentence for the social reputation of the middle class. When we examine the case studies of early American realism, we see a recurring theme: the internal divorce. Authors began to explore the concept of men who were legally bound to their wives but emotionally and spiritually severed from the union. This creates a high-stakes narrative tension where the man is a prisoner of his own success. The problem this solves for the modern reader is the realization that the feeling of isolation within a marriage is not a new phenomenon. It is a foundational element of the American experience. Consider the work of Edith Wharton, specifically The Age of Innocence. While written in 1920, it looks back at the 1870s, a time when the mere mention of divorce was enough to exile a person from New York high society. The protagonist, Newland Archer, represents the quintessential American male caught between the safe marriage that society demands and the authentic life he craves. Through Archer, Wharton illustrates the step-by-step erosion of a man's spirit when he chooses societal stability over personal truth. This provides a vital perspective on the historical cost of the ideal family structure. The potential outcomes for men in these early narratives were often bleak: a lifetime of quiet desperation or the total loss of one's community and standing. By analyzing these texts, we see that the legal evolution of divorce was preceded by a psychological revolution in literature where men began to question if the honorable choice was actually the moral one. As we move into the mid-20th century, the narrative shifts significantly. The post-World War II era saw a massive push toward suburban domesticity, but the literature of the time tells a much darker story. This period introduced the suburban nightmare genre, where the white picket fence becomes a cage. In masterpieces like Richard Yates's Revolutionary Road, we see a detailed breakdown of the psychological contract between a husband and wife. Frank Wheeler, the protagonist, is a case study in the frustration of the mid-century man who finds himself trapped in a life he thought he wanted. Yates provides a step-by-step account of how a lack of communication and the pressure to perform a specific version of masculinity leads to a catastrophic dissolution. For the modern audience, this solves the mystery of why the perfect life often feels so hollow. It highlights the historical trend of men using the domestic sphere as a surrogate for their own unfulfilled ambitions, a dynamic that inevitably leads to conflict. Furthermore, we must address the rise of the runaway husband trope, most famously seen in John Updike's Rabbit, Run. Harry Rabbit Angstrom became a controversial figure because he did what many men in literature only dreamed of. He simply left. He walked out on his pregnant wife and his mundane life to seek something he couldn't even name. Updike's work serves as a deep dive into the impulsive male reaction to the pressures of commitment. By examining Rabbit's journey, we aren't looking for a guide on how to behave, but rather a mirror reflecting the raw, unfiltered anxieties of a man who feels his life is being consumed by his responsibilities. The data from literary criticism suggests that Rabbit, Run was a turning point, marking the moment when the American male protagonist stopped trying to fix the marriage and started trying to save himself. This shift is crucial for understanding the modern perspective on divorce as a path toward self-actualization, regardless of the potential fallout. The promise of this deep dive is that by the end of this series, you will see divorce not as a singular event, but as a long-standing literary tradition that has defined the American male character. We will explore how these stories have evolved from the silent suffering of the 19th century to the explosive, transformative divorces of the late 20th century. We will look at the impact on fatherhood, the loss of the provider identity, and the eventual emergence of the new man who seeks a different kind of partnership. This is a masterclass in the human condition, viewed through the lens of the American legal and social landscape. We are taking the time to expand on these points because the nuance is where the real value lies. You cannot understand the modern man without understanding the ghosts of the marriages he has left behind in the pages of our history. We are setting the stage for a journey through the most difficult, most defining moments in the lives of our literary heroes, and in doing so, we are uncovering the truth about our own. The shift from the rigid Victorian standards of the late 1800s to the explosive social volatility of the 1920s represents one of the most significant historical trends in the American masculine narrative. Imagine if you are a modern American professional in 2026, someone like Mark, who has spent 20 years building a logistics empire. You have provided everything from the high-end smart home to the elite education for your children, only to realize that the person across the breakfast table sees you not as a partner, but as a utility. This exact feeling of becoming an obsolete archetype is what Sinclair Lewis captured in his 1929 masterpiece, Dodsworth. This novel serves as a foundational case study for the American man in transition. Samuel Dodsworth is a titan of industry, a man who built an automobile company from the ground up, but when he sells his business and takes his wife Fran on a grand tour of Europe, the domestic contract begins to disintegrate in real time. Lewis provides a step-by-step breakdown of how a man's identity, once tied to his labor and his role as a provider, collapses when those external structures are removed. In the 1920s, the divorce rate was climbing significantly, and literature began to reflect a new reality. The woman was no longer content with being a mere appendage to a man's success. Fran Dodsworth represents the new woman of the era, seeking intellectual and romantic stimulation that Sam, in his rugged American simplicity, cannot provide. This creates a high-stakes scenario where Sam is forced to confront the potential outcomes of his own loyalty. For the first time in prominent American fiction, we see a man navigating the humiliation of his wife's infidelity, not through the lens of a Victorian duel, but through the modern lens of a psychological breakdown. The depth of Lewis's analysis lies in how he portrays Sam's gradual realization that his marriage was a cage disguised as a kingdom. Historical trends of this period show that the legal system still required a guilty party for a divorce to be granted, often leading to staged infidelities or intense social shaming. In Dodsworth, we see the agonizing process of a man trying to save a union that has already died. Sam's journey through the capitals of Europe serves as a metaphor for the displaced American male, wandering through a world where his old values of hard work and stoicism no longer hold currency in the domestic sphere. The resolution of the novel was revolutionary for its time. Sam eventually chooses to leave Fran and finds a new life with the woman who values him for who he is, rather than what he builds. This was a radical departure from the tragic endings of the previous century. It suggested to the American public that divorce could be a gateway to a second act, a concept that was just beginning to take root in the national consciousness. Moving from the industrial realism of Lewis, we enter the fractured, silent world of Ernest Hemingway. If Dodsworth is about the noise of a marriage breaking, Hemingway's work is about the deafening silence that precedes the end. Consider the short story Cat in the Rain or the Nick Adams stories as case studies in emotional disconnection. Hemingway's men are often survivors of World War I, men who have seen the worst of humanity and return to a domestic life that feels trivial and suffocating. In Cat in the Rain, we see a husband who remains tethered to his book, ignoring his wife's desperate, symbolic pleas for something to care for. This is a profound exploration of the emotional neglect that often serves as the silent precursor to a legal filing. Hemingway's iceberg theory, where only 10% of the story is on the surface, perfectly mirrors the masculine experience of marital strife in the 1920s and 30s. The man doesn't talk about his feelings. He retreats into his work, his hobbies, or his trauma, creating a vacuum that the marriage cannot survive. Data from literary historians suggest that Hemingway's own 4 marriages and 3 divorces heavily influenced his portrayal of the masculine struggle for autonomy. His characters often find themselves in a state of existential dread, where the marriage represents a loss of the self. In A Farewell to Arms, the ultimate escape from the complications of life and love is death, but in his shorter, more domestic fiction, the escape is often a physical or psychological departure. For a man in 2026, reading Hemingway provides a window into the potential outcomes of suppressing one's internal life for the sake of maintaining a facade of strength. The step-by-step erosion of intimacy in these stories serves as a cautionary tale about the cost of stoicism. We must also examine F. Scott Fitzgerald's Tender is the Night, which provides a tragic counterpoint to the idea of the second act. Dick Diver is a case study of the professional man who is consumed by his marriage. As a brilliant psychiatrist who marries his patient, Nicole Warren, enters into a dynamic where he is both husband and caretaker. Over the course of the novel, we see a detailed, granular account of how Nicole's wealth and mental instability slowly drain Dick of his vitality, his career, and his identity. By the time the divorce occurs, there is nothing left of the man who started the story. This reflects a significant fear in the American male psyche, the fear of being used up and discarded. The novel shows the historical trend of the American elite using divorce as a tool for self-preservation, often at the expense of the man who facilitated their growth. Dick Diver's fade into obscurity at the end of the novel is one of the most haunting depictions of the post-divorce male experience in literature. He doesn't find a new life. He simply disappears into the small towns of New York, a ghost of his former self. To add more value to this analysis, we have to look at the legal landscape of the 1930s, specifically the rise of the divorce mill in Reno, Nevada. This geographic reality became a literary trope, representing a temporary purgatory where men and women went to shed their pasts. Literature began to treat Reno as a place of transformation, but for men, it often represented a loss of property and status. The stories of this era detail the logistical nightmares of the time, where a man might have to establish residency in a distant state just to escape a toxic situation. Imagine the pressure of 1934, where leaving your family not only meant losing your home, but potentially being blacklisted from your social and professional circles. The writers of The Lost Generation were the first to truly document this pressure, showing that the American man was beginning to value his psychological health over his social standing. In every one of these examples, from Lewis to Fitzgerald, we see a recurring theme: the struggle to redefine what it means to be a man once the title of husband is stripped away. The American hero is no longer just the man who conquers the frontier. He is the man who survives the collapse of his own home. This evolution in literature mirrors the actual societal shifts that would eventually lead to the more liberal laws of the late 20th century. But before we get to the era of no-fault divorce, we have to endure the pressure cooker of the 1950s. Imagine a world where the divorce rates briefly dipped as the nation sought stability after a Second World War, only to create a hidden epidemic of domestic despair. We are moving into a period where the suburban dream became a high-stakes game of appearances, where the cost of leaving was higher than ever before. In the next part of this masterclass, we will dive into the era of the man in the gray flannel suit and the hidden catalyst that led to the most explosive decade in the history of American marriage. What happens when the man who has everything realizes he has absolutely nothing? What occurs when the legal system begins to shift and the concept of the breadwinner is put on trial? The narrative is about to take a sharp turn into the heart of the American suburb, where the most famous literary divorces of all time were about to be written. To understand the internal architecture of the 1950s American male, we have to look past the vibrant Technicolor advertisements of the era and peer into the gray, claustrophobic reality of the corporate commute. Imagine if you are David in the year 2026. David is a senior project manager for a major tech firm in Austin. He has achieved everything the modern masculine script demands: a high six-figure salary, a meticulously landscaped property, and a social media presence that radiates domestic bliss. Yet, every morning as he stares at his reflection while the automated coffee maker hums, he feels an inexplicable sense of erasure. This is exactly where the literature of the 1950s begins. This era was defined by the organization man, a term coined by William H. White, describing a male population that had traded their individuality for the collective security of the corporation and the nuclear family. In this high-stakes social environment, divorce was not just a personal choice. It was a professional liability. Historical trends from the mid-20th century show that major corporations often vetted the wives of potential executives. A man with a failing marriage was seen as a man with a flawed character, someone who lacked the stability required for leadership. This created a pressure cooker atmosphere that authors like Sloan Wilson and Richard Yates dissected with surgical precision. Consider the case study of Tom Rath in Sloan Wilson's 1955 novel, The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit. Tom is a veteran of World War II. A man who has seen the visceral reality of life and death, now finds himself fighting a much more subtle war in the suburbs of Connecticut. The potential outcomes for Tom are binary. He can either succumb to the soul-crushing requirements of his high-pressure job to provide for his wife, Betsy, or he can risk the total collapse of his domestic life by seeking a more authentic existence. Wilson provides a step-by-step account of Tom's psychological erosion. The marriage isn't failing because of a lack of love. It is failing because the weight of the American dream has become too heavy for two people to carry. When Tom reveals he has a child from a wartime affair in Italy, the novel doesn't lean into the typical tropes of betrayal. Instead, it uses this secret as a catalyst to examine the fragility of the suburban contract. Betsy's reaction and their subsequent negotiation of the truth offer a rare literary look at a marriage that chooses a painful, honest reconstruction over a sanitized legal dissolution. For the 2026 viewer, this solves the dilemma of why transparency is often more terrifying than silence in a long-term relationship. However, if Tom Rath represents the hope of reconciliation, Frank Wheeler in Richard Yates's 1961 masterpiece, Revolutionary Road, represents the catastrophic failure of the male ego within the marital structure. This novel is the definitive deep dive into the death of the suburban dream. Frank Wheeler is a man who believes he is inherently special, a man trapped in a mediocre life by a mediocre job and a mediocre marriage. Imagine if you were Frank, convinced that your true potential was being stifled by the very people you are supposed to protect. Yates details the step-by-step escalation of Frank and April Wheeler's domestic warfare. They engage in what psychological case studies call the specialness trap, where both partners believe they are too intellectual or too artistic for their mundane surroundings. The brilliance of Yates's analysis lies in how he exposes Frank's dependency on the very structure he claims to despise. When April suggests they move to Paris so Frank can find himself while she supports them, Frank is secretly terrified. He realizes that his identity as the breadwinner, though frustrating, is the only thing giving him a sense of power. The potential outcomes of their conflict are not just emotional, they are existential. The detailed descriptions of their fights are not merely about chores or money. They are about the fundamental inability of the American male to reconcile his desire for freedom with his need for social validation. This case study is vital for understanding why so many men in literature stay in toxic situations until the point of total destruction. The eventual tragedy of Revolutionary Road serves as a stark warning about the historical trend of using a spouse as a scapegoat for one's own lack of purpose. To add more value to this masterclass, we must look at the legal hurdles of this era. In the 1950s, the United States operated under a fault-based divorce system. This meant that for a man to leave his marriage, he often had to prove that his wife had committed a legal wrong, such as adultery or extreme cruelty. Alternatively, he had to be the one to take the fall. This led to the historical phenomenon of the collusive divorce, where couples would manufacture evidence of an affair just to satisfy the court's requirements. Literature of the time, particularly the work of John Cheever, often focused on the sheer exhaustion of maintaining these legal and social facades. Cheever's short stories like The Swimmer or The Shady Hill Chronicles provide a granular look at the men who lived in these gilded cages. These are men who navigate their lives through a series of rituals: the commute, the cocktail hour, the weekend party. But underneath, there is a profound sense of loss. In The Swimmer, Nettie Merrill's journey through the pools of his neighborhood is a step-by-step descent into the reality of his own divorce and social exile. He begins the story as a man of status and ends it shivering in front of an abandoned, locked house. This serves as a powerful metaphor for the post-divorce male experience in the mid-century. Once the domestic anchor is gone, the man finds himself drifting in a world that no longer recognizes him. Data from the 1960 census indicates that while divorce rates were lower than they are today, the psychological distress reported by married men in urban areas was at an all-time high. This discrepancy suggests that literature was capturing a hidden epidemic of what we now call the midlife crisis, but which was then understood as a failure of masculine duty. The writers of this period were documenting the precise moment when the American man began to realize that the provider role was a double-edged sword. It gave him authority, but it also made him a prisoner of his own paycheck. But as we transition into the late 1960s and early 1970s, the landscape shifts again. The rigid structures of the 1950s begin to crack under the weight of the counterculture movement and the rise of second-wave feminism. The literary male protagonist is no longer just complaining about his commute. He is actively dismantling the institution of marriage from the inside out. We are moving into an era where the legal system finally catches up to the psychological reality of the people it governs. What happens when the laws change and the concept of no-fault divorce becomes a reality? How does the American man react when he is suddenly handed the keys to his own cage, only to find that he has no idea where to go? In the next part of this masterclass, we are going to explore the era of the Great Uncoupling. We will dive into the work of John Updike and Saul Bellow, analyzing the men who traded the safety of the suburbs for the chaos of the city. We will look at how the shift in divorce law transformed the American man from a captive into a seeker, and the unexpected price he had to pay for his newfound autonomy. The era of the runaway husband is here, and the consequences will redefine American literature forever. The opening of the cage door did not happen with a bang, but with a silent legislative stroke. As we move into the late 1960s and early 1970s, we witness the single most transformative historical trend in the history of American domestic law: the arrival of no-fault divorce. Before this, a man like Michael in 2026 might have had to manufacture a narrative of betrayal or cruelty to escape a soul-deadening union. But starting with the California Family Law Act of 1969, signed into law by then-Governor Ronald Reagan, the legal requirement to assign blame was dismantled. This shift created a new literary archetype: the seeker. For the first time, the American man was legally permitted to leave simply because he no longer felt like staying. This sounds like ultimate freedom, but as the literature of the era demonstrates, the potential outcomes of this autonomy were often marked by a profound, haunting emptiness. Imagine if you are James in 2026. You are 42 years old, living in a sleek, minimalist apartment in downtown Denver. You have finalized a no-fault divorce that was, by all accounts, civilized. There were no shouting matches in court, no private investigators, just a mutual agreement that the spark had vanished. You have your freedom, your weekends, and your autonomy. But as you sit in the silence of your perfectly curated living room, you realize you have no idea who you are outside the context of being a husband and a father. This is the exact psychological terrain that John Updike mapped out in his Rabbit Angstrom tetralogy, specifically starting with Rabbit, Run. Harry Rabbit Angstrom is the definitive case study of the runaway husband. He is a former high school basketball star who finds the domesticity of his early 20s to be an atmospheric suit of lead. Updike provides a step-by-step account of Rabbit's impulsive flight. It begins with a mundane task, picking up his son, and turns into a desperate drive toward the south. Rabbit isn't running toward a specific woman or a specific goal. He is running away from the encroaching grayness of his life. Through Rabbit, Updike explores a terrifying historical trend: the man who equates movement with progress. Rabbit's flight is a visceral reaction to the feeling of being trapped by a wife, Janice, who has succumbed to alcoholism and a life that feels like a dead end. The depth of this narrative lies in its refusal to offer easy answers. Rabbit is not a hero, but he is undeniably American in his belief that there is always another frontier, another town, another version of himself waiting just over the horizon. Updike's work, particularly the Maples stories, offers an even more granular look at the civilized divorce. Richard and Joan Maple are the intellectualized versions of the suburban couple. Their divorce is a long, slow evaporation. Updike details the step-by-step process of their uncoupling, from the shared jokes that lose their humor to the strategic way they tell their children about the separation. This is a vital case study for the 2026 viewer because it highlights the psychological complexity of the no-fault era. When there is no villain, the pain becomes diffused and harder to process. Richard Maple represents the man who uses his intellect as a shield, trying to rationalize the end of his marriage as an inevitable evolutionary step. The potential outcomes here are not explosive, but they are deeply isolating. Richard finds that while the legal system has made it easy to leave, the human heart has no such simplified procedure. While Updike was exploring the physical and emotional flight of the suburban man, Saul Bellow was conducting a deep dive into the intellectual collapse of the divorced male psyche. In his 1964 novel Herzog, we meet Moses Herzog, a man whose life has been shattered by a bitter divorce and his wife's infidelity with his best friend. Herzog is a case study in the hyper-intellectual masculine response to trauma. Instead of running, he writes. He writes endless, frantic letters to the living and the dead, to Nietzsche, to Spinoza, to his ex-wife, to God. He is a man trying to reason his way out of his agony. Bellow provides a detailed look at the historical trend of the male ego under siege. Moses Herzog feels that his failure as a husband is a failure of his entire worldview. For the modern man, this solves the puzzle of why divorce often feels like an intellectual crisis as much as an emotional one. When the structure of the family collapses, the man often feels the need to rebuild the entire universe from scratch to justify his existence. Herzog's journey through New York, Chicago, and eventually his dilapidated country house in the Berkshires serves as a metaphor for the fragmented state of the post-divorce male mind. He is surrounded by the ruins of his personal life, trying to find a single thread of meaning. The step-by-step unraveling of his sanity, and his eventual arrival at a state of silent peace, offers a profound look at the potential outcomes of a man who refuses to look away from his own pain. To add more value to this analysis, we must consider the data surrounding the 1970s divorce boom. Between 1960 and 1980, the divorce rate in the United States more than doubled. This wasn't just a legal change, it was a cultural earthquake. Literature became the primary medium through which the nation processed this shift. The runaway husband and the intellectual exile were not just fictional characters. They were reflections of a generation of men who were the first to navigate the world without the traditional guardrails of lifelong marriage. Case studies from the era show that as men moved into the bachelor pads and singles bars that began to proliferate in American cities, a new kind of social anxiety emerged. The literary protagonists of writers like Frederick Exley and A Fan's Notes or Philip Roth in Portnoy's Complaint represent the raw, often ugly, reality of this newfound freedom. These characters explore the historical trend of the man who, having escaped the domestic cage, finds himself addicted to the very chaos he thought would save him. They are men who are perpetually dissatisfied, searching for an authentic experience that the 1950s denied them, but finding only a different kind of loneliness in the 1970s. Roth, in particular, provides an aggressive, unflinching look at the masculine drive for autonomy. His characters often see marriage as a form of spiritual castration. The divorce then is a desperate attempt to reclaim their potency. However, the potential outcomes are often a descent into narcissism and a total inability to form lasting connections. This is a crucial lesson for the 2026 audience. The literature of the no-fault era teaches us that while you can legally end a contract, you cannot easily outrun the psychological patterns that led you to sign it in the first place. As we conclude this part of the masterclass, we have seen the American man move from the quiet desperation of the gray flannel suit to the erratic flight of Rabbit Angstrom and the frantic letter writing of Moses Herzog. We have seen how the legal revolution of the late 60s opened the door to a new kind of masculine existence, one defined by seeking rather than staying. But the search for the self often leads to a confrontation with the most difficult role of all, the father. What happens to the man when the house is no longer his, but he is still expected to lead? How does the literature of the 1980s and 90s handle the rise of the weekend father and the complex, often litigious world of joint custody? The era of the seeker is about to hit the brick wall of responsibility, and the results will produce some of the most heart-wrenching and insightful works in the American canon. In the next part, we dive into the world of Kramer versus Kramer and the literature of the displaced father, where the battle for the home becomes a battle for the soul. The stakes are about to get much higher, And the path to redemption is through the one thing most men were never taught to navigate: the vulnerability of parenthood in the wake of a collapse. The transition into the late 1970s and early 1980s marked a fundamental shift in the American masculine narrative, moving away from the man who runs away and toward the man who stays to fight for his children. This era introduced the most poignant and socially significant case study in the history of domestic literature: Avery Corman's 1977 novel, Kramer vs. Kramer. To understand the gravity of this shift, imagine if you are Alex in 2026. You are a devoted father who manages your custody schedule through an encrypted co-parenting app. You have a 50-50th split, and your entire identity is built around the 3.5 days a week you spend with your daughter. You are not just a provider, you are a primary caregiver. But in the literary world prior to Corman, this archetype barely existed. The historical trends of the early 20th century largely viewed the father as a secondary figure in the emotional lives of children, a man whose duty ended at the child support check. Kramer vs. Kramer dismantled this perception by offering a step-by-step account of Ted Kramer's radical transformation. When his wife Joanna leaves to find herself, Ted is left with their young son, Billy, and a demanding career in advertising. For the first time, a major American novel focused not on the man's sexual liberation or his intellectual crisis, but on the granular, exhausting reality of single fatherhood. Corman details the potential outcomes of this pressure: the initial panic, the burned meals, the missed deadlines at work, and the eventually profound bond that forms when a man is forced to prioritize a child's needs over his own ego. This wasn't just a story about a breakup. It was a manifesto for the modern father. It challenged the tender years doctrine, a legal presumption that had historically favored mothers in custody disputes, suggesting that a father's love could be just as essential and nurturing. The high-stakes climax of the novel, the custody battle, provided a deep dive into the legal system's inherent biases against men. Through Ted's eyes, the American public saw the humiliation of a man being told that his professional success made him a less capable parent. This case study is vital for the 2026 audience because it highlights the origin of the joint custody movement. Ted Kramer's willingness to sacrifice his high-flying career to keep his son was a revolutionary act in the 1970s. It suggested that for the American man, the ultimate fulfillment might not be found in the boardroom or on the open road, but in the quiet, mundane moments of domestic care. The data from the decade following the book's release shows a significant increase in fathers seeking primary or joint custody, proving that literature often serves as the vanguard for legal reform. As the 1980s progressed, another literary giant emerged to document the blue-collar version of this domestic collapse: Raymond Carver. If Kramer vs. Kramer was about the middle-class struggle for custody, Carver's short stories were about the quiet, desperate aftermath of the divorce for men who had very little to begin with. In stories like Chef's House and Gazebo, Carver provides a minimalist, unflinching look at the historical trend of the displaced male. Imagine if you are a man whose marriage has ended, and you are living in a rented house or a cheap motel, trying to piece together a sense of dignity while battling the ghosts of your past. Carver's men are often in recovery, not just from alcohol, but from the failure of their own lives. Carver's brilliance lies in the step-by-step observation of small failures. He doesn't write about grand court battles. He writes about the way a man looks at his hands while sitting in a kitchen that no longer feels like his. The potential outcomes for Carver's protagonists are often cyclical: a brief moment of hope followed by a return to the isolation that defined them. For the 2026 viewer, Carver solves the mystery of why divorce feels so different for the working man. When you lack the financial resources to reinvent yourself, the divorce is not a new beginning. It is a long, slow process of attrition. Carver's work serves as a case study in the resilience of the human spirit under the weight of ordinary tragedy, showing that for many men, the end of a marriage is a loss of the only stable ground they ever knew. Moving into the late 80s and early 90s, we encounter Richard Ford's Frank Bascombe, the protagonist of The Sportswriter and Independence Day. Frank Bascombe is perhaps the most reflective divorced man in American letters. He is a man who has experienced the death of a child and the subsequent dissolution of his marriage, yet he refuses to be a victim. Ford provides a detailed analysis of what he calls the period of existence, that strange, detached state where a man lives his life without the heavy anchors of traditional commitment. Imagine if you are Frank in 2026, living in a quiet suburb, maintaining a civil relationship with your ex-wife, and navigating the complexities of your adult children's lives. You are not unhappy, but you are perpetually aware of the space where your family used to be. The Bascom series is a deep dive into the psychology of the post-divorce man who chooses to remain engaged with the world. Ford shows us the historical trend of the man as a spectator of his own life. Frank Bascom's step-by-step navigation of his suburban reality, his job as a sports writer, his interactions with his neighbors, his attempts at new romance, offers a blueprint for the man who is trying to find meaning in the mundane. The potential outcomes here are nuanced. Frank finds a kind of peace, but it is a peace born of lowered expectations and a profound understanding of his own limitations. This reflects a major shift in the American male psyche. The move from the hyper-ambitious provider of the 50s to the more contemplative, flexible man of the late 20th century. To add even more value to this masterclass, we must address the rise of the deadbeat dad trope in the media during this period and how literature fought against it. While the evening news was often filled with stories of men who abandoned their financial obligations, the literature of the time, including the works of writers like Tobias Wolff and André Dubus, focused on the men who were desperately trying to stay connected. Case studies from Dubus's short stories like A Father's Story explore the lengths to which a man will go to protect his child, even when he is no longer part of the daily domestic life. These stories provide a granular look at the moral complexities of fatherhood outside the bounds of marriage, showing that the emotional bond often becomes even more intense when it is no longer taken for granted. This era of literature teaches us that the end of a marriage is not the end of a man's story, but the beginning of a much more difficult and rewarding one. It redefined the American hero as a man who is willing to be vulnerable, a man who values his role as a father above his social status, and a man who is capable of navigating the ruins of his life with a quiet, persistent dignity. But even as men were learning to find their footing in this new domestic reality, the world was changing again. The late 90s and early 2000s would bring the digital revolution and a new set of challenges that would once again transform the landscape of divorce. What happens when the privacy of the home is replaced by the transparency of the internet? How does the American man handle the dissolution of his marriage when every move is tracked, analyzed, and shared? We are moving into the era of the high-conflict divorce, the rise of the digital paper trail, and the literature that explores the man caught in the crosshairs of a society that never forgets. In the next part, we will dive into the works of Jonathan Franzen and Philip Roth's later masterpieces, where the battle for the truth becomes the ultimate high-stakes game. The era of the permanent record has arrived, and for the divorced man, the past is never truly dead. It's just a click away. As we enter the late 1990s and the first decade of the 21st century, the American literary landscape underwent a massive seismic shift. We moved away from the quiet, suburban isolation of the mid-century and into a world where privacy began to evaporate. Imagine if you are Kevin in the year 2026. Kevin is a high-level executive at a renewable energy firm. He is going through a divorce, and for the first time in his life, his internal thoughts are no longer private. Every text message sent in anger, every GPS location tracked by his smart vehicle, and every search query regarding his dissatisfaction has been archived. In 2026, the divorce is no longer just a legal separation. It is a forensic audit of a man's character. This is the reality that Jonathan Franzen began to predict with his 2001 masterpiece, The Corrections, and later in his 2010 epic Freedom. Franzen provides us with the definitive case study of the modern, overanalyzed American male in Walter Berglund. Walter is the antithesis of the 1950s Stoic. He is sensitive, environmentally conscious, and deeply invested in the ethics of his lifestyle. Yet, in Freedom, we see a step-by-step breakdown of how this hyper-awareness leads to a different kind of domestic catastrophe. The potential outcomes for a man like Walter are unique to our era. He becomes a prisoner of his own moral superiority. Walter and his wife, Patty, engage in what can be described as a competitive suffering. Their marriage isn't failing because of a lack of communication. It's failing because they are communicating too much, and every word is being recorded in the ledger of their mutual resentment. For the 2026 viewer, Walter Berglund solves the mystery of the high-conflict divorce. It's not always about money or infidelity. Often, it's a battle over the narrative. In the digital age, the man who loses the narrative loses his social standing. Franzen details how Walter's public persona as a good man is weaponized against him during the slow dissolution of his marriage. This reflects a historical trend where the American man is no longer judged solely by his ability to provide, but by his ability to perform a specific sanitized version of domesticity. When the performance fails, the fallout is public and permanent. The novel provides a granular look at the embarrassment of the modern man who tries to do everything right, only to find that the rules of the game have changed beneath his feet. To understand the weight of the permanent record, we must also look at the late career works of Philip Roth, particularly The Human Stain and The Dying Animal. Roth, writing at the turn of the millennium, became obsessed with the concept of the Great Unmasking. His protagonists are often older men who are forced to confront the wreckage of their past marriages and affairs in a society that has become increasingly litigious and judgmental. Imagine if you are an older man in 2026, looking back at a divorce from 15 years ago. In the past, those secrets might have stayed in the courtroom files. Now they are accessible to your children, your colleagues, and your future partners with a simple search. Roth provides a deep dive into the psychological toll of this transparency. His characters, like David Kopesh or Coleman Silk, are case studies in the masculine struggle for autonomy in a world that refuses to forget. The potential outcomes here are often tragic: the loss of a hard-earned reputation or the total alienation from one's family. Roth's step-by-step analysis of how a single past indiscretion can be unearthed and used to dismantle a man's current life is a chilling preview of the cancel culture dynamics we see today. For the American man, the divorce is no longer a closed chapter. It is a living document that can be edited and reinterpreted by anyone with an axe to grind. The data from the early 2000s shows a significant rise in what sociologists called the Gray Divorce, couples over the age of 50 ending long-term marriages. Literature responded by focusing on the man who finds himself suddenly single in a digital world he doesn't fully understand. This introduced a new layer of complexity to the masculine narrative: the digital learning curve. In the early 2000s, this meant navigating the first iterations of online dating and social media. In 2026, for a character like Kevin, it means navigating a world of algorithmic matchmaking and AI-driven reputation management. The literature of the last 20 years has been documenting the precise moment when the American man lost his ability to disappear. Consider the step-by-step process of a modern literary divorce, as depicted in contemporary fiction. It often begins with the discovery of a digital paper trail. In the past, a man might have been caught by a receipt in a pocket. Today, it's a cloud sync notification on a shared iPad. This leads to a high-stakes period of digital discovery, where legal teams comb through years of metadata to build a profile of the husband's character. The potential outcomes of this process go far beyond the division of assets. They determine who gets to keep the friends, who gets to keep the professional network, and who is branded as the villain in the social media feed. Adding more value to this analysis, we have to look at how authors like Claire Messat and Jeffrey Eugenides have explored the concept of the husband as a spectator to his own replacement. In The Emperor's Children or Middlesex, we see men who are navigating the end of their marriages, while the world around them is changing at a dizzying pace. These are men who feel they are losing not just their wives but their place in history. The historical trend here is the displacement of the traditional male authority. As the digital economy rewards different types of intelligence and social navigation, the old-school provider finds himself obsolete. The divorce in these narratives is the final confirmation of that obsolescence. The American man in 21st century literature is a man under a microscope. He is navigating the ruins of the nuclear family while the cameras are rolling. This has created a new kind of literary hero: the man who is trying to find a way to be authentic in a world of total transparency. He is no longer running to Reno or driving into the sunset like Rabbit Angstrom. He is sitting in his office staring at a screen, trying to figure out how to rebuild his life when the entire world knows exactly how it fell apart. But there is a new frontier emerging in the literature of the 2010s and leading into our current year of 2026. It is the literature of the co-parenting era, where the divorce is not an end, but a complex, ongoing merger. We are moving into a period where the American man is redefining his relationship with his ex-wife and his children through the lens of radical transparency and shared responsibility. What happens when the man and the woman are forced to remain in each other's orbits for decades after the legal papers are signed? How does the literature of the present day handle the rise of the blended family and the man who must navigate the egos of multiple households? We are entering the era of the integrated man, where the battle for the home has been replaced by the negotiation of the schedule. In the next part, we will dive into the works of authors like Michael Chabon and Gary Steingart, looking at the man who is trying to find his footing in a world where the traditional family hasn't disappeared. It has just become a lot more crowded. The era of the permanent connection is here, and for the divorced man, the true test of character is just beginning. The concept of the clean break has become a historical relic in the canon of American literature. As we move into the mid-2020s, the narrative of the man who simply packs a suitcase and vanishes into a new life has been replaced by the man who is perpetually tethered to his past by a web of digital notifications and shared administrative responsibilities. Imagine if you are Brian in the year 2026. You have been legally divorced from your ex-wife, Sarah, for 5 years. On paper, you are an autonomous individual. You live in a modern townhouse in suburban Charlotte, you have a successful career in cybersecurity, and you have started dating again. But your reality is anything but solitary. Your smartphone is a constant conduit to your previous life. You are part of a shared Google Calendar that dictates your movements with the precision of a military operation. You have a Slack channel dedicated exclusively to the logistics of your 2 children. You are not a runaway. You are a logistics manager for a distributed domestic corporation. This transition from the runaway to the administrator is one of the most profound historical trends in the contemporary American masculine narrative. It reflects a shift in our legal and social understanding of fatherhood. In the 20th century, as seen in the case studies of Rabbit Angstrom or even Ted Kramer, the struggle was often about the right to be present. In 2026, for the literary male protagonist, the struggle is about how to be present without being consumed. This is the central tension in the works of Gary Steingart, particularly in his 2018 novel Lake Success. While the protagonist, Barry Cohen, attempts a classic American flight, leaving his high-stress hedge fund life and his crumbling marriage to travel across the country by Greyhound bus, the novel serves as a deep dive into the impossibility of escape in the modern age. Steingart provides a step-by-step deconstruction of the male fantasy of starting over. Barry Cohen is a man who thinks he is in an Ernest Hemingway novel, but he quickly realizes he is in a 2020s reality. He is haunted by the digital trail of his finances, the medical needs of his son, and the undeniable emotional gravity of the woman he left behind. The potential outcomes of Barry's journey are not a new identity, but a painful, granular realization that his manhood is defined by his obligations, not his freedom. This is a vital lesson for the 2026 audience. The literature of our time suggests that the most courageous thing a man can do is not to leave, but to navigate the complexities of staying connected in a healthy, sustainable way. Expanding on this point, we must look at the rise of dad lit, or the domestic thriller from a masculine perspective. Authors like Jonathan Tropper and Harlan Coben often place their male protagonists in the center of a post-divorce maelstrom, where the stakes are the safety and stability of the blended family. Imagine if you are a character in 2026 who has recently remarried. You are now a bonus dad to 2 teenagers while trying to maintain a co-parenting relationship with your ex-wife and her new partner. This is what we call the integrated man. The literature of this era details the high-stakes negotiation of ego and authority that occurs in these households. It is a world where the traditional male role of the household head is replaced by a committee of stakeholders. A case study in this complexity can be found in the works of Michael Chabon. While Chabon often explores historical settings, his male characters are frequently defined by their relationship to the family unit, whether that family is traditional or constructed. In his later works and essays, he captures the historical trend of the man as a curator of his children's experiences. This provides a deep dive into the emotional labor that modern men are now expected to perform. For the 2026 viewer, this solves the dilemma of why the post-divorce life often feels more exhausting than the marriage itself. The potential outcomes of this labor are a deeper, more resilient bond with one's children, but the cost is a permanent loss of the solitary self. Data from recent social studies in the United States indicates that men are increasingly taking on the role of the primary or equal logistical parent following a divorce. Literature has responded by moving the action from the courtroom to the kitchen table. We see characters who are struggling with the mental load of parenting, tracking doctor appointments, managing social schedules, and navigating the emotional nuances of a child's experience in 2 homes. This is a step-by-step evolution from the mid-century provider who barely knew his children's teachers' names. The modern literary man is deeply, often obsessively, involved in the minutiae of his children's lives. But what does this mean for the man's identity? In the past, the divorced man in literature was often a figure of tragedy or a figure of liberation. Today, he is a figure of integration. He is trying to synthesize his professional ambitions, his personal desires, and his permanent parental duties into a coherent whole. This often leads to what we see in the work of writers like Dave Eggers, the man who is perpetually trying to be the best version of himself for an audience that never stops watching. Whether it is through the lens of a father traveling with his children or a man navigating the gig economy after a domestic collapse, Eggers provides a detailed look at the performance of modern masculinity. To add more value to this analysis, we should consider the role of the ex-wife in these modern narratives. She is no longer the antagonist or the abandoned victim. She is a permanent business partner. The literature of the 2020s, including works by authors like Nathan Hill in The Nix or Wellness, explores the intricate, often frustratingly close relationship that persists long after the romantic spark has died. These stories provide a granular look at the historical trend of the eternal marriage, a state where the legal divorce is just a change in tax status, but the psychological and social union remains intact. For a man in 2026, this perspective is crucial. It highlights the potential outcomes of a high conflict versus a collaborative approach to post-divorce life. The characters who succeed are the ones who can treat the relationship with the ex-wife as a professional partnership dedicated to the success of the children. As we examine these case studies, we see a recurring theme: the search for a new kind of peace. It is not the peace of the open road or the peace of the bachelor pad. It is the peace of a well-managed schedule and a stable, albeit complex, family life. The American man in literature has finally come to terms with the fact that he is not an island. He is a node in a network. This shift has profound implications for how we view success. In 2026, the successful divorced man in literature is not the one who has moved on to a younger wife and a new family. He is the one who has successfully integrated his past and his present. He is the man who can sit at a high school graduation next to his ex-wife and her new husband and feel a sense of shared accomplishment. This is the new frontier of the American dream, a dream that is less about the individual and more about the endurance of the community, however fragmented it may be. But as we master the logistics and the administration of our lives, a new question emerges. In a world of permanent connection and shared schedules, where does the man go to find his own soul? Is there still a place for the rugged individualism that once defined the American hero, or has it been completely subsumed by the requirements of the group? We are moving into the final stages of our masterclass, where we will explore the return of the interior life. We are going to look at the most recent cutting-edge literature that asks, once you have fulfilled all your obligations, who are you when the screen goes dark? In the next part, we will dive into the literature of the new solitude, where men are seeking a different kind of freedom, not from their families but within themselves. The journey of the integrated man is about to take an inward turn, and the discoveries he makes will challenge everything we think we know about the American male psyche. The inward turn of the American male in literature marks the transition from the logistics of separation to the archaeology of the self. Imagine if you are Ethan in the year 2026. You have mastered the shared calendars. You have negotiated the distribution of assets. You are, by all societal metrics, a successful participant in the modern divorce. But when the children are at their mother's house and the smart lights in your apartment dim to their evening setting, you are confronted with a silence that no generation of men before you has truly had to navigate. In the 1950s, a man in your position would have sought refuge in a bottle or a bar. In the 1970s, he might have sought a revolution of the flesh. But in 2026, the literature suggests a different path: the deep, often uncomfortable dive into the interior life. This is the era of the new solitude, where the divorced man is no longer running away from a home, but is instead running into the vast, uncharted territory of his own consciousness. This shift is best exemplified by the rise of autofiction and the highly reflective male protagonist found in the works of writers like Ben Lerner or the American-influenced school of domestic realism. In these narratives, the potential outcomes of the man are not defined by a new marriage or a career change, but by a fundamental restructuring of his reality. Case studies in contemporary fiction show a move away from the external conflict of the courtroom and toward the internal conflict of the memory. The man becomes a historian of his failure. He analyzes the step-by-step degradation of his marriage not to assign blame, but to understand the precise moment he lost his sense of self. This is a vital evolution because it addresses the modern male crisis of identity that occurs when the roles of husband and primary resident father are stripped away. Consider the case study of Toby Fleischman in Taffy Brodesser-Akner's Fleischman is in Trouble. While the novel's perspective is complex, Toby represents a significant archetype for the 2020s. The man who believes he is the hero of his own story because he did everything he was supposed to do. He is a doctor, he is a present father, and he is a man who stayed. When his marriage dissolves and his ex-wife disappears, Toby is forced to confront the potential outcomes of his own entitlement. The novel provides a granular look at the divorced man's ego, showing how he uses his status as a victim to avoid looking at his own complicity. For the 2026 viewer, this is a profound lesson in the danger of the single narrative. It highlights a historical trend where men in literature are finally being asked to look at the world through a lens that isn't entirely centered on their own needs. The data from the last decade of literary awards and bestseller lists indicates a growing appetite for stories that explore the vulnerability of the single man. We are seeing a move away from the hypermasculine hero and toward the man who is willing to admit he is lost. This is a step-by-step process of dismantling the traditional American masculine ideal. In the past, the divorced man was often portrayed as a threat to the social order or a tragic figure of isolation. Today, he is a case study in the resilience of the human spirit. He is a man who is learning to be alone without being lonely, a man who is discovering that his value is not tied to his ability to maintain a nuclear family. Imagine if you are Ethan again, navigating the dating apps of 2026. You are not looking for a replacement wife, you are looking for a mirror. The literature of our time, such as the works of Teddy Wayne or Garth Greenwell, explores the high-stakes emotional landscape of the modern man seeking connection in a fragmented world. These stories detail the potential outcomes of the second adolescence that many men experience post-divorce. It is a period of experimentation, of trial and error, and of a profound search for authenticity. The step-by-step navigation of new relationships, the awkwardness of re-entering the social market in your 40s or 50s, and the realization that the old rules no longer apply are all central themes in the contemporary American canon. To add more value to this analysis, we must address the concept of the ghost marriage. This is a recurring theme in 21st century literature where the divorced man continues to live his life in conversation with his ex-wife, even in her absence. He buys the groceries she would have liked. He hears her voice in his head when he makes a decision. He measures his new life against the old one. This is a deep dive into the psychological persistence of the domestic bond. Case studies from contemporary short stories often focus on these small haunting moments of recognition. They show that for the American man, divorce is not a clean break but a permanent haunting. The historical trend here is the shift from the physical presence of the wife to the psychological presence of the ghost, a transition that requires a man to develop a high degree of emotional intelligence to navigate. Furthermore, we must look at the role of the house itself in these narratives. In the 1950s, the house was a symbol of success. In the 1980s, it was a battleground for custody. In 2026, the house or the apartment is a laboratory for the self. The literature of the present day provides a detailed look at how men curate their space post-divorce. The act of buying a new couch, of hanging art that the ex-wife would have hated, of establishing new rituals in a solitary space is a step-by-step process of reclamation. It is the physical manifestation of the inward turn. This provides the 2026 viewer with a perspective on the importance of the environment in the healing process. The potential outcomes of this reclamation are a sense of agency and a renewed understanding of one's own tastes and desires. As we examine these various literary movements, we see that the American man is currently in a state of profound transition. He is moving from a life defined by external structures to a life defined by internal values. He is learning that the most important relationship he will ever have is the one he has with himself. This is the ultimate promise of the new solitude. Not that it will be easy, but that it will be honest. The literature of the 2020s is documenting this struggle with a level of detail and empathy that was previously reserved for the domestic sphere of women. But there is one final hurdle for the divorced man to clear, and it is perhaps the most difficult one of all. It is the intersection of his personal collapse and his public responsibility. How does a man maintain his integrity in a world that is increasingly cynical about the very idea of commitment? How does he handle the financial and legal realities of his new life without losing his soul to the process? We are approaching the final stages of our deep dive, where we will confront the machinery of the divorce itself. In the next part, we are going to look at the literature of the system. We will explore the works that treat the legal and financial dissolution of marriage as a high-stakes thriller. We will look at the case studies of men who have been ground down by the gears of the family court system, and those who have found a way to navigate it with their dignity intact. The era of the inward turn is about to meet the cold, hard reality of the balance sheet. What happens when the seeker of truth meets the seeker of child support? The narrative is about to take a sharp turn into the mechanics of the ending, and the lessons learned there will be the most practical of all. When the seeker of truth meets the seeker of child support, the American man in literature enters a new, colder genre. We move from the psychological drama into the procedural thriller. Imagine if you are Christopher in the year 2026. You have spent the last decade as a high-performing software architect in Seattle. You believed your marriage was a partnership of equals, a shared venture in both emotional and financial capital. But as you sit in a sterile, glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor of a downtown skyscraper, you realize that the legal system does not care about your late-night conversations or your shared dreams. It cares about the math. This is the moment where the deep dive into the mechanics of the ending begins. In the canon of American letters, the courtroom and the lawyer's office are portrayed not as places of justice, but as incinerators of the past. This shift represents a significant historical trend in American storytelling. The evolution of the divorce lawyer from a background character into a primary antagonist or a dark mentor. In the mid-20th century, legal proceedings were often handled offstage. In the 21st century, the literature of divorce has become obsessed with the discovery phase. Authors like Scott Turow and even Jonathan Franzen have detailed the step-by-step process of the forensic audit of a life. For the 2026 viewer, this provides a vital perspective on the potential outcomes of a high-asset dissolution. The literature suggests that the system operates on a logic of maximum friction. The more the characters fight, the more the machine is fed. Consider the case study of the legal consultation in modern fiction. It is often depicted as the moment the protagonist loses his agency. In the works of writers like Philip Roth, the lawyer is a figure who translates the man's complex human emotions into the dry, adversarial language of the law. This creates a profound sense of alienation. Imagine the character's shock when his years of hard work and sacrifice are reduced to a spreadsheet of marital assets and separate property. This reflects a historical trend where the American man is forced to confront the fact that the state is a silent third partner in his marriage. The step-by-step breakdown of how a man's retirement accounts, home equity, and even his future earning potential are put on the chopping block serves as a high-stakes cautionary tale for the modern audience. To add more value to this analysis, we must look at the literature of the deposition. In fiction, the deposition is the ultimate test of the masculine ego. It is a detailed, granular interrogation where every past mistake is weaponized. Authors use this setting to explore the theme of the permanent record. Imagine if you are Christopher, and you are forced to sit for 8 hours while an opposing counsel asks you about every text message you sent, every late night at the office, and every dollar you spent on a hobby. The literature of the 2010s and 2020s highlights the historical trend of the digital paper trail, becoming the primary evidence in the destruction of a man's reputation. This is where the seeker of truth is dismantled by the seeker of leverage. Data from the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers suggests that the use of digital evidence has increased by over 80% in the last decade. Literature has mirrored this, creating a subgenre of the divorce thriller, where the man is a fugitive from his own metadata. The potential outcomes in these stories are often a total loss of privacy and a redefined sense of vulnerability. This solves the problem of the modern man's technological complacency. It shows that in the eyes of the system, there is no such thing as a private thought if it was typed on a device. The step-by-step unraveling of a character's life through his browser history or his location data is a recurring trope that highlights the high-stakes reality of the 2026 legal landscape. Furthermore, we must examine the literature of the custody evaluator. This is a specific figure in modern American fiction who acts as a secular god, deciding the fate of the father-child relationship. In novels like those by Taffy Brodesser-Akner, the evaluation process is a deep dive into the minutiae of domestic life. The man is judged on the cleanliness of his refrigerator, the contents of his bookshelves, and his ability to recall his child's favorite teacher. This represents a historical trend of the professionalization of parenthood. For the man in literature, the potential outcomes of a poor evaluation are catastrophic. It is a battle for the soul of the next generation, conducted in the sterile language of social work and psychology. The financial aftermath is another area where American literature provides a detailed, often brutal analysis. We see this in the works of writers like Tom Wolfe, where the cost of a divorce is not just the legal fees, but the total collapse of a man's social ecosystem. The step-by-step descent from a luxury penthouse to a one-bedroom rental is a recurring motif that explores the link between masculinity and property. The balance sheet becomes the final judge of the man's worth. If he cannot maintain the lifestyle of his former family, he is often portrayed as a failure by the society around him. This provides the 2026 viewer with a sobering look at the historical trend of the post-divorce economic dip for men, which is often overshadowed by the social narrative of the wealthy bachelor. In every one of these literary case studies, from the high-powered lawyers to the forensic accountants, the message is the same. The system is designed to reach a conclusion, not a resolution. The characters who survive are those who learn to speak the language of the machine without losing their humanity. They are the men who realize that while the balance sheet can be divided, their integrity remains their own. This is a vital lesson for the 2026 man, navigating the complex web of modern family law. The literature serves as a guide for what to expect when the romance ends and the litigation begins. As we move through these narratives of discovery and deposition, we see the American man being stripped of his old identities. He is no longer the provider, the protector, or the husband in the eyes of the court. He is a respondent. He is a payer. He is a visitor. But as the system finishes its work and the final decree is signed, a new question emerges. Once the assets are divided and the schedules are set, who is the man that remains? We are approaching the conclusion of our deep dive masterclass. We have traveled from the silent suffering of the 19th century to the forensic transparency of the digital age. We have seen the American hero fall, flee, fight, and eventually integrate. But there is one final piece of the puzzle. It is the legacy. What do these stories tell us about the future of the American man? How does the literature of divorce prepare the next generation for a different kind of commitment? In the final part of this series, we will synthesize everything we have learned. We will look at the emergence of the new man, the one who has survived the system and found a way to build a life on his own terms. The era of the ending is over, and the era of the new beginning is about to be written. The final revelation is just ahead. The era of the new beginning in American literature is not characterized by the absence of pain, but by the mastery of its legacy. Imagine if you are Daniel in the year 2026. You are 45 years old, sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Seattle, 5 years removed from the legal dissolution of your marriage. You are no longer the man who stood in that glass-walled conference room. You have moved through the forensic audit, the digital discovery, and the silent nights of the new solitude. You are what contemporary literature is beginning to define as the reconstructed man. In the historical trends of the past, Daniel would have been a cautionary tale of isolation or a tragic figure of lost status. In 2026, Daniel is the protagonist of a new kind of narrative, one that views divorce not as the end of a life, but as the clearing of the ground for a more authentic architecture. This final stage of our masterclass examines the emergence of the post-divorce hero in 21st century American letters. We are seeing a move away from the catastrophic endings of the 20th century and toward stories of integration and resilience. Case studies in modern fiction, such as the works of Brandon Taylor or the expansive domestic realism of Jonathan Franzen's latest iterations, provide a step-by-step look at how the American man is redefining his worth. The potential outcomes for this new hero are focused on the concept of emotional maturity as the ultimate masculine virtue. The data from literary criticism in 2026 suggests that the most popular male characters are those who have survived a personal collapse and emerged with a deeper, more nuanced understanding of their own vulnerability. To understand this shift, we must look at the step-by-step process of the character's pivot from the past to the future. In the literature of 2026, this often begins with the realization that the man's identity is no longer tied to the roles of provider or protector in the traditional sense. He has become a protector of his own integrity and a provider of his own meaning. Imagine if you are Daniel, and you are writing the first chapter of your next life. You are not looking for a way to fix what was broken. You are looking for a way to build something entirely new on the same foundation. This is the central theme of what scholars call the literature of reconstruction. It focuses on the high-stakes work of self-governance. The man who can govern his own emotions, his own schedule, and his own relationship with his past is the new American hero. Expanding on this point, we must address the role of mentorship in these modern narratives. We are seeing a historical trend of the divorced father becoming a mentor not just to his children, but to other men. In the literature of the 2020s, the shared experience of the domestic collapse becomes a ground for a new type of masculine community. This is a radical departure from the isolation of the 1950s gray flannel suit. Case studies in contemporary short fiction show men engaging in deep, honest conversations about their failures and their hopes. This provides a detailed look at the potential outcomes of collective healing. For the 2026 viewer, This solves the mystery of why the modern man feels a greater sense of connection to his peers after a divorce than he did during his marriage. The shared struggle creates a bond that is not based on social status or professional competition, but on human reality. The final revelation of this masterclass is that the dissolution of the contract is the birth of the individual. For over 150 years, American literature has been documenting the slow, painful process of the American man breaking free from the rigid structures of the 19th century family. We have seen the runaway, the seeker, the intellectual exile, and the logistical administrator. But the reconstructed man of 2026 represents the synthesis of all these stages. He is a man who can navigate the legal system without losing his soul, who can co-parent with his ex-wife without losing his identity, and who can live in solitude without losing his connection to the world. To add more value to this final analysis, we should look at how the concept of the American dream has been rewritten in these modern texts. In the past, the dream was about the acquisition of the family unit. In 2026, the dream is about the acquisition of the self. The literature provides a granular look at the potential outcomes of this new dream. A life that is smaller in scope but deeper in meaning. We see characters who find profound satisfaction in the mundane rituals of their solitary lives. The morning coffee, the weekend hike with their children, the creative work that they finally have the space to pursue. The step-by-step reclamation of these small joys is the true victory of the modern divorced man. Historical trends show that we are moving toward a society where the traditional linear narrative of life, marriage, house, children, retirement, is being replaced by a more cyclical, modular approach. Literature is the primary medium through which we are learning to navigate this new reality. The divorced man is the pioneer of this modular life. He is the one who has learned how to build and rebuild, how to lose and gain, and how to remain resilient in the face of constant change. This is the deep-seated value of the American literary tradition. It provides us with blueprints for our own survival. As we conclude this journey through the history of divorce for men in American literature, we realize that the stories we tell ourselves are the most powerful tools we have. By understanding the evolution of the masculine narrative, we can see the potential outcomes for our own lives with greater clarity. We can see that the collapse of a marriage is not a failure of character, but a transition phase in a much larger story. The American man is not a static archetype. He is a work in progress, and his most important chapters are often written in the aftermath of his greatest challenges. The mastery of this history allows us to step into the future with a sense of agency. We are no longer the victims of our circumstances or the ghosts of our pasts. We are the authors of our own reconstruction. The journey of the divorced man in American literature is ultimately a journey toward freedom. The freedom to be authentic, the freedom to be vulnerable, and the freedom to start again. But as one story ends, another is always beginning. While we have mastered the internal and legal architecture of the divorce, a new challenge is appearing on the horizon of the American narrative. What happens when the reconstructed man re-enters the world of commitment? How does he navigate the complex ethics of the second and third acts of his life, in an era of total transparency and shifting social norms? We have looked at the end of the marriage, but we have yet to fully explore the beginning of the next era. The evolution of the American male psyche is far from over, and the next chapter is already being written in the quiet corners of our modern world. In our upcoming special deep dive series, we will explore the literature of the second marriage and the rise of the intentional family. What occurs when a man who has lost everything decides to risk it all again? The ultimate test of the reconstructed man is about to begin, and the stakes are higher than they have ever been.